Aloha and welcome to this special Pacific Forum event, Chinese Views on Korean Unification, supported by the UniKorea Foundation in Seoul. I'm Rob York, Director for Regional Affairs at Pacific Forum and one of the co-authors and speakers for this event, which shares with you the results of our research surveying Chinese experts and analysts on the future of the Korean Peninsula and steps that might be taken to promote peace and unification. Before that, a note on interpretation. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see the globe for interpretation. And if you click on that, we have options for interpretation into English, Chinese, and Korean so that everybody can better enjoy our findings and our discussion. Our published research on the topic of Chinese views on Korean unification is in the chat now. Before discussing the paper's findings, which we're all here for today, I want to now turn the floor over to Pacific Forum's President and CEO, David Santoro, for opening remarks. David?
Thank you very much, Rob, and aloha to everybody from here in Hawaii, the U.S. mainland, the Korean Peninsula, and everywhere around the world. As Rob mentioned, my name is David Santoro, and I'm President and CEO of the Pacific Forum, which, as I'm sure you know, is here based in Honolulu. So we at the Pacific Forum have always been very strong supporters and believers in the U.S.-South Korea alliance, and we've run numerous programs and conducted research on the alliance. We believe that the alliance has helped uphold peace and security on the Korean Peninsula for more than 70 years, and more broadly, we are believers in the U.S. alliance system in Asia. That being said, we also believe that it is important to do the hard and essential work of dialogue, including with China and with North Korea, so that we can learn about their viewpoints. And so through our conferences, our Track 1.5 and Track 2 dialogues, as well as our network of researchers, we've always tried to ensure that important decision makers in the US government, in the South Korean government, and beyond, we've made sure that they've had access to those views so that they can form good policy and hopefully change the situation for the better. So the alliance between the United States and South Korea, as I'm sure you know, is entering an interesting new phase with changing opinions in both countries about the nature of the very nature of the alliance and its future. And we are very thankful to the UniKorea Foundation for supporting this project that Rob mentioned. And we hope that this project's findings will be of value to the decision makers in Washington, in Seoul, and beyond. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. So first, we have Dr. Rob York, who is Pacific Forum's Director for Regional Affairs and the lead researcher for this project. And of course, Rob has been tracking inter-Korean affairs for well over a decade and a half, in fact, in various capacities. And those capacities have included being a reporter for the Korea Herald, a chief editor for NK News, and a production editor at the South China Morning Post. He has earned his PhD in Korean history in 2023. His co-author, Dr. Xiaoyi, is a non-resident Lloyd and Lillian Vasey Fellow at the Pacific Forum. She too brings a wealth of experience in foreign policy analysis from the Global Green Growth Institute, the United Nations Volunteer Program, the East-West Center, and many other organizations. She speaks fluent Chinese, English, and Korean, and she's earned her PhD in Asian Studies from the University of British Columbia in 2024. So welcome to the both of you, and back over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, David, for that introduction. Before Xiaoyi and I begin with our presentation, I would also like to welcome our discussants for today's program. From the Hiroshima Peace Institute at Hiroshima City University, we have Professor Hyunjin Son, whose specialty is international law, whose research focuses on North Korean nuclear issues, human rights issues, and international relations on the Korean Peninsula. He has also published widely on the topics of peace and security, digital public information, and climate policy. From the National Security Journal, we have Harry Kazianis, who is the former senior director of the National Security Affairs at the Center for the National Interest in Washington, D.C. Harry has over a decade of think tank and national security publishing experience. His ideas have been published in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, CNN, and many other outlets around the world. He has held positions at CSIS, the Heritage Foundation, the University of Nottingham, and several other institutions related to national security. We thank both of you for your participation and look forward to your comments. Now, for our presentation, we will begin. China, as I'm sure all of you know, it plays an outsized role in the affairs of the Korean Peninsula and has for many, many decades, centuries, in fact. Today, we think of China as an ally of North Korea for many decades, as well as a trading partner for both Koreas, including being the largest trading partner of South Korea. It therefore will play a very important role not only in inter-Korean relations, but also in any future unification scenario or agreement to maintain the peace. Its importance is such that South Korea, along with the United States, has long sought China's support in the process of fostering unification, or at least a durable peace regime. And as recently as the administration of the conservative Park Geun-hye in South Korea from 2013 to 2017, it was not uncommon for even conservative South Koreans to try to get China to play a proactive role in the process. These hopes have faded somewhat in recent years as US China, but also China South Korea relations have grown more and more tense, especially under the administration of the conservative Yoon Suk Yeol, who left office at the end of last year. Recent changes in both South Korea and the United States, however, have injected some additional hope into this process, perhaps. The Trump administration, which met with the Kim regime several times in 2018 and 2019, both formally through summits and informally, is back and has signaled an interest in continuing to deal with North Korea. Earlier this year, his Secretary of State said that they were interested in exploring arrangements that could prevent inadvertent conflict, for instance. Also, we have the Lee Jae-myung administration that has just taken office in South Korea. And in addition to signaling an interest in peaceful coexistence with North Korea, has also requested that China play a constructive role in the process of fostering unification. And it was with this as the backdrop that our research took place, sponsored by the Uni-Korea Foundation. And to discuss more about that, I will hand it over to my co-author, Xiaoyi.
Thank you so much, Rob. Firstly, I would like to thank the UNIF Korea Foundation's generous support to this research and make it possible for us to conduct this research among Chinese experts. And as a non-resident fellow, I also appreciate Pacific Forum giving me this opportunity to conduct this research and also work with Director Rob York on this meaningful project. Despite many the Chinese experts we interviewed, we conduct survey with, were not able to attend this event due to the sensitivity of this topic and for some political reasons. But some of them especially the key expert who working on this project, working on this topic in China, they actually email Rob saying that it's a very meaningful topic and they fully support us on this research. So yeah, thank everyone for bring this research possible. And basically, this research is to get an overview of Chinese experts' views on the peninsula issue, and also to get some recommendations on that. Next slide. And in order to get a relatively objective response, we created a comprehensive survey for the first step. And the survey questions has three sessions, three big sessions. The first session questions covers questions on how, covers on evaluations of the effectiveness of China, US, South Korea, and North Korea's strategies for bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula. The second section focuses on how important peace and eventually unifications is to the countries I mentioned above. The third session covers some questions related to constructive next steps and the long-term objectives on the Korean Peninsula issues. And besides these questions, we also ask Chinese experts with long and short answers questions to let them to give us advice and also opinions on the Korean Peninsula issue. In total, we received 18 responses. Most of the responses from mainland China, and all of the responses are from Chinese experts who were born and grew up in China. Just it happens to that four of them are outside China due to work reasons or personal choice, and one of them from a autonomous territory of China, and the rest of them all from mainland China, and most of them working in Chinese universities and research institutes. Besides the first round of survey, we also conduct the second round of survey. Questions relate to how a more wide range of related topics, like China's reaction to North Korean region collapse and how China views North Korean Russian cooperation on Ukraine. Compared to the first survey, we were not able to get as many as responses in the second follow-up surveys, but still we get meaningful response, meaningful opinions from our responses. And next slide, I will briefly talk about the background of this survey and how the methodologies for us to using these studies. Well, the reason that we were only able to get 18 responses was largely because the current situations in China. We reached out for more than 18 participants through our own network and including the network given by the Uni Korean Foundation. First round, we use email to contact those Chinese experts on this topic, but we were not able to get many replies at the first stage. And later on, we tried to use our own network and WeChat to communicate them first, and then to introduce ourselves, introduce our topic and introduce our research, and to have built relationship with them first and then share the survey with them. So it's a long process, but thankfully we get 18 meaningful responses to the first survey. But still many Chinese scholars, especially the ones working for government-related research institutes, said they are not very comfortable to responding to the survey. There are two major reasons. First major reason is because since 2018, the warming of PRC-North Korea relations, so any publications related to North Korea were not supported by the Chinese government. So it's not openly announced in Chinese academia, but basically if you want to publish any pieces related to North Korea, you will very likely get a decline from the publisher. So not many new young scholars working on this topic in China, and because it's very difficult for scholars to get publications and to get grants. So fewer and fewer people are working on this topic and are interested in this topic at this moment. And also due to the current US-China relations involving research with North America think tank become very sensitive for Chinese experts. That is another reason that they were not able to come to join this event personally. But regardless, again, they shared many Chinese scholars, they strongly support our research and they share very constructive response to the surveys. Okay, I will go hand it over to Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiaoyi. In some ways, the willingness or lack thereof of some scholars and the conditions that led to those the conditions that led to those responses is in itself an item worthy of study. But we want to go into the survey results and talk about some of the more notable findings from there in particular. We started with a couple of questions so that we could gauge how the scholars see the PRC's perspective on the Korean Peninsular issues, especially in comparison to the other major players, such as the US, South Korea, and North Korea. And we started with the question of how important peace is on the Korean Peninsula to these countries. You'll notice that this does not ask unification. It simply asks peace, peaceful arrangements that may fall short of unification or may include it. It depends. And you'll notice here that for most of our respondents, they said that for the People's Republic of China, it's crucial for them to see a peaceful Korean Peninsula. They rated China's view of this situation and its prioritization of peace on the peninsula as higher than that of the United States, but less than that of the South Koreans or the North Koreans, for whom they said it is more likely to be a national priority. When you change the wording slightly to that of unification, then the answers change somewhat. The Chinese experts and scholars said that the issue of unification or the prospects of unification are important. They were more likely to say that it is important to the PRC, but not as likely to define it as being crucial. And this is also true of their view of the United States, for whom they said it is an important issue, but not necessarily a crucial one. For South Korea and North Korea, answers were largely the same. Again, they were more likely to see it as a national priority for those countries. Now, regarding how they view the efficacy of the countries involved and how important it is to them to promote peace on the Korean Peninsula, it was largely their view that the most effective party in this dispute has been China. The United States was rated considerably lower, and it received by a good margin the most not at all effective scores, and also it scored relatively high in the occasionally effective category. If you look at the Republic of Korea or South Korea, you can see that there is a good number of responses who said occasionally effective or mostly effective. Those will be numbers that will be especially important later on in this survey. Then we went through a range of options, a range of scenarios that could be considered to promote peace. And some of these concerned end results, such as an inter-Korean confederation in which the two Koreas coexist peacefully and cooperate, but maintain separate identities. Then some of them concerned also a treaty ending the Korean War and the complete denuclearization of North Korea. And the Chinese scholars are largely supportive of these options, although their views of an inter-Korean confederation in particular are relatively mixed. Other outcomes, however, that they were much more supportive of include steps that can be taken, interim steps that could be taken by the United States, such as the lifting of sanctions, a treaty officially ending the war. As many of you know, the hostilities from the Korean War never officially ended. They signed an armistice simply halting them in 1953. And lastly, the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the peninsula is also considered very important to the Chinese experts when it comes to promoting peace. This is their personal opinions regarding these scenarios. Now, regarding how they believe the government of China regards scenarios, we asked a similar range of questions, such as how does the People's Republic of China view a peace treaty ending the war? How does it view an inter-Korean confederation? How does it view, at the bottom, the unification of the peninsula and a number of interim steps that can be taken? Again, many of these goals, such as a peace treaty, such as a confederation, such as unification, they are largely in supportive of them. They largely consider them to be progress, at least. But the strongest reactions that they had to these steps were in the area of interim steps that could be taken by the United States, whether positively or negatively. They were quite positive to the idea, again, of the U.S. troop withdrawal. They said that the PRC government would react quite positively to that idea. They reacted overwhelmingly negatively to the idea of more U.S. troops on the peninsula, however, which they said would be a national security threat, or would be viewed as a national security threat by Beijing. And the idea of the United States supplying South Korea with more weapons and more weapon systems was regarded, if anything, even more negatively by the experts, or at least that's how they said the PRC government would react. Towards the end of the survey, we asked our participants which country they feel has made the greatest contribution to peaceful unification. Perhaps unsurprisingly, a majority of them said China has made the greatest contribution, but a relatively high number of them said South Korea has actually played the most positive role when it comes to peaceful unification. I presume that for many of them, the reactions of here overlap with those who said that South Korea's response has been occasionally or mostly effective. And as you'll note at the bottom, one respondent listed both Koreas together. Now, in the question of which country has posed the greatest threat to peace on the Korean Peninsula, again, no surprise, it's the United States. However, not in substantial number of respondents said that the problem is North Korea, with a few of them putting the two Koreas together, and one respondent listing all three parties other than China as the greatest problem that the Korean Peninsula faces. As for their justifications for these answers, one respondent said that China is playing the most positive role because despite officially being an ally of North Korea, it has basically been neutral and would therefore support any arrangement that is helpful for the stabilization of the region. And this, they said, it separates China from the other major players. One person who spoke in favor of South Korea highlighted the efforts that South Korea has made over the years, over the decades, in order to promote inter-Korean talks and trying to lower the temperature on the Korean Peninsula through those talks. However, even this person noted the polarization in South Korean politics, especially toward North Korea, which they said makes it difficult to ensure a consistent policy on North Korea. As far as those who said that the United States is playing the most negative role, one said simply, look at Ukraine, nothing more needs to be said. And they highlighted the US as being good at drawing other countries into scenarios that are harmful for them and then withdrawing support, and said that a similar possibility could take place in Northeast Asia. Another said that the United States has maintained consistent pressure on North Korea from the beginning, and this has caused North Korea to take certain countermeasures and caused an escalated confrontation security dilemma. However, one scholar noted that the North Koreans have long sought the policy of nuclear deterrence in order to guarantee their own security and also to expand their influence, and even used the term root of all evil to describe North Korea's position on nuclear arms. Their broad suggestions for the parties involved were that the People's Republic of China should largely continue to facilitate relations between those parties involved and also continue to act as a mediator, much as it has done. They urged North Korea to halt the brinksmanship that they have engaged in the past and engage in good faith. Regarding South Korea, they asked that South Korea assume more responsibility for its own security and have what they call a normal relationship with the United States, not a military alliance. One scholar also said that South Korea should avoid engagement in other affairs, such as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, AUKUS, other affairs much further afield. For the United States, they urged, as the answers earlier indicated, a less active role in the peninsula, such as lifting sanctions, fewer military exercises, and stopping efforts to draw South Korea into a trilateral with itself and Japan. General suggestions, they call for a reduced sanctions regime in exchange for phased denuclearization, and an action for action roadmap is the term that was used, as well as the resumption of economic and cultural exchanges. Now, having broken the ice with many of these scholars and introduced them to our questions and the themes of our survey, we attempted to get more information from them about specific scenarios that we consider valid for the Korean Peninsula as of today, such as whether unification will in fact take place, if it is realistic to think so, how China views the deepening partnership between North Korea and Russia, as well as what China expects should North Korea experience regime instability, and specifically what it expects from South Korea and the United States. Unfortunately, results were far more limited than in the initial round, as Xiaoyi pointed out. We got 2 respondents, and while 2 respondents cannot be said to meaningfully represent the range of Chinese opinions on these matters, we do note that there were contrasts in terms of how they responded. While neither expects unification anytime soon, one scholar based inside China said that Russia and North Korea have expanded ties as a legitimate reaction to U.S. hostility. However, another scholar based outside of China said that it might have stemmed from China's discomfort with overt support for the Ukraine invasion by Russia. And this might have pushed the 2 closer together. One scholar said that in the event of regime collapse, there would be a need for multilateral cooperation to contain nukes, but also said that Beijing would demand no purges of North Korean leadership by the South Koreans and their U.S. supporters. So the term show trials was used basically for describing the outcome that could await North Korean officials in this case, and said Beijing would strongly be against that. The scholar based outside of China stressed the need for cultural and economic exchanges in order to deepen ties. When asked if there should be penalties for violating agreements and penalties that would apply to any party involved, the scholar hesitated to offer anything, but said that if there are penalties for violating an agreement, they should be economic in nature, not military. Our conclusions and recommendations are: South Korea's leadership appears serious about wartime operational control transfer and has actually set the target date of 2030, which could put it within the time frame in which President Lee Jae-myung is in office. We've also seen rumors persist that the United States may be interested in withdrawing some troops from the peninsula and may emphasize homeland and hemispheric security closer to home, which would suggest at least a deprioritization of events further afield. Given the answers that we received on our survey, it seems that the possibility of a reduced presence and greater South Korean autonomy may be something that the three incumbent governments can agree on. As such, we have said that any reduction in the U.S. troop presence should be contingent on the actions of North Korea and China. If China is in favor of a action for action roadmap and phased denuclearization, they should draw up such a blueprint for a security arrangement on the peninsula and also put their own pressure on North Korea in order to get them to the table to negotiate such an agreement that works for everyone. I want to stress, as David said in his opening remarks, that we are supporters of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, and this is not something we would recommend in a vacuum. However, a negotiated departure that results in a comprehensive deal is better than a U.S. departure with no agreement. Finally, we regret that more scholars from China were not able to participate and that they cited problems related to academic freedom and their own security for doing so. That is most unfortunate. But we hope that these findings have nonetheless been enlightening, and we thank the Uni-Korea Foundation for its support in helping us gather them. And with that, we will turn the program over to our discussants. First of all, we have Professor Hyunjin Son. Professor, the floor is yours.
네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 히로시마 평화연구소, 히로시마 시립대학교 평화연구소 손현진이라고 합니다. 먼저 샤오이와 러브리오크 교수님의 발표 정말 잘 들었습니다. 그리고 이러한 회의에 참석하고 싶었지만 언어적인 문제로 참석하지 못하였지만 이번에 통역을 제공해 주셔서 너무너무 감사드립니다. 먼저 먼저 제 이력을 간단히 소개하고자 합니다. 저는 일본 히로시마 평화연구소에 오기 전에 한국의 통일부에서 국제인도법 전문가, International Humanitarian Law 전문가로서 활동을 하였습니다. 주로 북한 핵 문제와 북한 인권 문제를 담당하였습니다. 그 시기에는 북한의 2006년 10월이죠. 제1차 핵실험이 시작된 시기였기 때문에 북핵 문제를 관리하고 그리고 지난 과거와 비교해서 많은 탈북자들이 이 한국에 들어왔기 때문에 그런 탈북자 문제를 관리하는 북한 인권 문제에 대해서 실무적으로 일을 하였습니다. 그리고 이산가족 문제라든지 그리고 유엔의 북한 인권 결의안 등의 문제도 주로 다루었습니다. 이 시기에는 특히 이 북핵 문제가 막 시작된 시기였기 때문에 육자회담이 진행된 시기와 겹칩니다. 그래서 인도적 지원 관계라든지 이러한 관계로 평양을 비롯하여 금강산이나 남포 등 북한의 이 지방 도시에 여러 번 방문을 한 기회도 있었습니다. 그때 북한의 열악한 인프라 시설이라든지 북한 당국자들과의 협의를 통해서 북한 내부 사항을 많이 알게 된 계기라고도 할 수 있습니다. 이러한 때 경험에 지금의 연구 생활에서 많이 도움이 되고 있는 것 같습니다. 그리고 본론에 들어가자면은 보내주신 PF를 나름대로 꼼꼼하게 보았습니다. 중국에서 본 한반도 관점이라는 제목인데 이 북한 문제를 포함한 한반도 문제에 대해서 과연 중국과 미국은 전략적으로 경쟁하는 동시에 협력할 수 있을까 하는 퀘스천입니다. 이걸 생각해 볼 때 결론적으로 미국과 중국은 그들의 전략적 목표를 위해서 이 한반도 문제, 남한과 북한을 포함한 이 한반도 문제를 이용하고 활용하지 않겠나라고 저는 개인적으로 생각합니다. 먼저 이 경쟁과 협력은 국가 간의 관계에 있어서 과연 경쟁과 협력을 할 수 있는가? 이 경쟁과 협력은 국제 관계에 있어서 경제나 스포츠, 문화 관계에서 흔히 볼 수 있습니다. 그러나 북한이라는 국가를 사이에 두고 중국과 미국은 이미 전쟁을 한 관계이고 여전히 이 전쟁은 75년이 지난 현 시점까지 종결되지 못하고 휴전 상태에 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 한반도 문제와 관련해서 미국과 중국의 관계를 생각해 볼 때 이 한국 전쟁을 어떻게 마무리 지을 것이냐에 따라서 많이 달라질 것이라고도 생각합니다. 평화협정을 맺든 아니면 문서로서 종전선언을 하든 어떠한 방식으로든 해결돼야만 하는 문제라고 생각을 합니다. 그러한 의미에서 이러한 주제로 토의할 수 있다는 것은 의미 있는 일이라고 생각합니다. 한반도의 평화 정착 및 북한 문제는 이미 남북한의 문제를 넘어서 국제화 문제가 되었습니다. 특히 중국의 입장에서 한반도 및 북한 문제를 살펴본다는 것은 굉장히 의미 있는 일이라고도 생각합니다. 이 본 페이퍼에서 먼저 발표하신 페이퍼에서 중국 내 또는 중국 외에 있는 전문가들의 의견을 묻는 일은 굉장히 쉽지 않은 일입니다. 일본에서도 유학생들이나 중국 전문가들의 한반도 및 북한 문제에 대한 의견을 요청하는 문제 또한 굉장히 어렵습니다. 왜냐하면 아직도 중국 내에서 아까 말씀하신 대로 북한 문제를 자유롭게 설명하고 분석하는 여건 분위기가 되지 않고 있기 때문입니다. 그러한 가운데 1차 이 페이퍼의 설문조사에서 20명, 2차에서 18명이라는 중국 전문가들의 의견을 들었다는 것은 매우 의미 있는 일이라고 생각합니다. 그렇지만은 본 페이퍼 프로젝트에서 지적하였듯이 문헌 검토에 있어서 최근 2020년 이후의 논문이나 분석이 없다는 것이 아쉬운 부분입니다. 2019년 자료가 제일 최근이긴 하지만 대부분 2015년에서 12년에서 15년 자료로 최근 2020년 이후의 자료가 없다는 것입니다. 이 시기는 한국에 있어서 박근혜 정부의 동북아 평화 협력 구상이죠. Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative라는 동북아 평화 협력 구상이라는 대북 정책으로 비군사적이죠. 보건이라든지 의료, 에너지, 사이버 안보, 환경 등 이러한 비군사적 안보를 강조한 시기로 한국이 주도권을 가지고 대북 정책을 한 시기라고도 볼 수 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 이때의 상황은 굉장히 지금 현 상황과 많이 다르다고도 볼 수 있습니다. 물론 이 시기에는 북한이 헌법 전문에 이 핵 보유국으로서 명시하고 실질적 핵 보유국의 길로 들어서기 시작한 때이기도 합니다. 따라서 유엔을 비롯한 미국에서도 대북 제재를 본격적으로 시작한 시기이기도 합니다. 이러한 상황에서 중국은 표면적으로는 북한의 비핵화를 찬성하고 대북 제재에 있어서도 반대하지 않았지만은 실질적으로 있어서는 최소한의 북한에 대해서 최소한 경제적 지원을 하는 등 북한의 인민경제, 시민경제죠. 많은 역할을 하고 있었던 것도 사실입니다. 한반도 평화 정착, 나아가서 한반도 통일과 관련해서 중국의 기본적인 입장은 아까 설문조사에서도 알 수 있듯이 많은 것을 알 수 있었지만은 기본적으로 중국의 기본적인 입장은 현재 한반도의 현상 유지와 상황의 관리입니다. 즉 어떻게 다른 말로 이야기하면은 아무것도 변화를 원하지 않고 있는 상황입니다. 이 말은 무엇이냐면은 반대로 미국과 한국 주도의 평화 정착, 한반도 통일에 관여해서는 미국과 한국 주도의 통일과 평화 정착은 반대라는 것입니다. 이 페이퍼 설문조사에서 알 수 있듯이 평화 정진에 있어서 중요한 조치로 한국 전쟁의 완전한 종결 조약과 더불어 주한미군의 철수와 대북 제재의 해제입니다. 이러한 말은 북한의 주장과 정확하게 일치하고 있습니다. 최근이죠. 올해죠. 저번 달입니다. 2025년 9월 23일 제14기 최고인민회의에서 김정은 위원장은 이런 말을 했습니다. 남북 관계에 있어서 통일은 불필요하고 남한과는 적대적 관계로 정확하게 규정을 하였습니다. 그리고 미국에 대해서는 비핵화를 포기하면 언제든지 대화를 하겠다고 주장을 했습니다. 언급을 하였습니다. 이 이야기는 이제 중국 전성절, 북한 김정은 위원장이 참석하였죠. 전성절을 계기로 조성된 북한의 상황 변화입니다. 변화된 대외 전략으로 볼 수도 있습니다. 즉, 북한, 중국, 러시아 연대와 그리고 이때까지 상황이 별로 좋지 않았던 북한과 중국과의 관계의 회복입니다. 그리고 러시아와 북한과의 군사 관계를 포함한 지속적인 관계라는 게 있어서 중국과 러시아에 있어서 북한의 중요도가 굉장히 상승을 했다는 것도 알 수 있습니다. 지난 2018년, 19년 정상회담, 물론 성공에 이르지 못했지만 이 사례에서 볼 수 있듯이 비핵화에 관련된 북한과 미국과 입장은 굉장히 확연히 다릅니다. 설문조사에서도 나온 바와 같이 단계적 비핵화라든지 행동 대 행동이라는 로드맵 구축이라는 것입니다. 이 중요한 것은 비핵화의 정의인데 나중에 시간이 나면 다시 구체적으로 좀 설명을 하도록 하겠습니다. 중국은 이 테이블 7에서 알 수 있듯이 이 1945년 이후에 이 남한의 상황이 중국의 입장, 미국에 대한 입장을 가장 잘 설명하고 있는 부분이라고 생각할 수 있습니다. 테이블 7 부분 밑에 있는 부분입니다. 이 한반도의 유사 상황, 즉 북한의 체제 붕괴라든지 여러한 이유로 북한의 급속한 붕괴, 그리고 한국 주도로 한 흡수 통일은 중국에 있어서 또 다른 동북 안보에 큰 수정을 가져다 줄 수 있다는 문제입니다. 지금까지 지금까지 미국과 한국의 영향을 완충작용으로 한 북한의 소멸은 중국의 입장에서 끔찍한 상황이기 때문입니다. 지난 2007년 사드 문제에 볼 수 있듯이 한국 내 미국의 무력 정각은 중국의 입장에서는 있을 수 없고 큰 위협이 될 수 있다는 것입니다. 특히 테이블 6, 7 부분에서 평화통일에 가장 큰 기여를 한 국가를 중국이라 하였고 가장 큰 위협이 될 수 있는 국가는 미국이라 했는데 이에 대한 구체적인 이유도 같이 물어봤으면 알 수 있었으면 굉장히 좋았을 것이라고 생각합니다. 그래서 항상 또 중국은 기본적으로 한반도 문제, 대만 문제를 연계를 하고 있다는 것입니다. 한국과 미국이 대만 문제에 관여하지 않았으면 하는 입장이 중국의 기본적인 입장입니다. 그리고 또 하나의 변수는 미국과의 동맹관계인데 동맹관계가 변한다는 말입니다. 변했다고 할 수가 있습니다. 이전에는 군사적 동맹이 유지였지만은 지금 트럼프 정부를 보면은 거의 동맹이 아니라 비즈니스 관계로 전환된 것이라고도 할 수 있는데 이게 한반도 정책의 중요한 변수로도 볼 수 있습니다. 마지막으로 제가 제안을 한 2개 정도는 드리고 싶습니다. 북한 문제에 대해서. 먼저 북핵 문제 해결을 위해서 조직된 육자회담이 있습니다. 물론 2008년 이후로 이게 실패로 끝났지만 북핵 문제를 위해서 새롭고 더 발전된 체제가 필요합니다. 현재 상황과 같이 육자가 같이 모여서 하는 다국간 협의, 그리고 한국, 미국, 일본과 북한, 중국, 러시아가 이분된 상황에서 서로 합의가 지금 불가능 상황이 있습니다. 현 상황이. 따라서 제3국에서 북한 문제를 다룰 수 있는, 북핵 문제를 다룰 수 있는 1.5 트랙이면 더 좋겠죠. 새로운 기구의 구축입니다. 가능하다면 제3국인 캐나다 혹은 호주에서 주도권을 가지고 다국간 혹은 이국 간 협의를 중심으로 해서 중재자 또는 조정자 역할을 하는 기구의 설립이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각합니다. 마지막으로 대북 정책에는 정답이 없습니다. 한국의 모든 대북 정책 실패를 일건 성공했던 결과적으로 보면은 실패로 한 것으로 알 수 있지만은 이 한반도 평화 정책 통일 대북 정책은 한반도 평화와 통일을 위해 하나의 가정이고 방법 중에 하나의 시도라고 볼 수 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 이러한 여러 가지 시도가 해볼 수 있는 게 필요하다고 생각합니다. 그리고 지금 현재 한국 대북 정책과는 조금 차이가 있지만은 북한 핵 문제와 인권 문제의 연계입니다. 북한은 현재 국제사회에서 인권 문제에 대해서 유일하게 적극적으로 반응을 하고 있습니다. 무시하지 못하고 반응을 한다는 것이죠. 따라서 이 국제사회에서는 북한의 인권상 특히 3만 4천 명 이상 탈북자 문제를 포함해서 끊임없이 북한 인권 문제를 국제사회가 제기하고 이를 북한 핵 문제에 활용을 할 수 있으면 좋지 않을까라고 생각하면서 저희 토론을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Professor. Okay. And Harry?
All right. Well, thank you everybody for having me. Thank you to Pack Forum, to David, to Rob. It's good to see all of you. I'm sure some of you I haven't seen since the pandemic, or maybe a little bit before, a little bit after. So it's good to be in good company. Um, First of all, I would say about the paper, just very broadly, being somebody who's been a publisher, whether years and years ago when I ran The Diplomat, ran The National Interest, other publications, I know how difficult it is to try and bring in authentic Chinese voices from the mainland, to reassure them that they're able to speak, but not only that, to make sure that their voices are heard, to get them out to a wide audience. It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, I remember trying to do that when I was a junior editor back at the Diplomat back in 2011. It was difficult then, and as the years have gone on, it's gotten even more difficult. When I've run to try different symposiums of the national interest, specifically on issues on North Korea and Chinese viewpoints, as the years went on, it just got harder and harder. So compliment to PACNet and all the work that's gone into this. It's very difficult to get those voices and build up that level of trust, to get those authentic voices out there. So I empathize what you went through, because I've been there before. Different sort of work, but again, trying to get those authentic voices out there and do the research and bring it to a bigger audience, whether that's an academic audience that I was working with, or you trying to bring it to an academic audience, or to governments. It's hard. So I appreciate that. I appreciate what you tried to do. What I would say though is that your research is very well timed, because after many years of really being in a bad place when it came to relations on the Korean Peninsula, and challenges of trying to bring the North Koreans out for talks, trying to work on things like denuclearization, trying to work on things such as lowering the temperature on the Korean Peninsula. Obviously, since the pandemic in the years after that, we haven't had much luck. Lot of things can be blamed for that. I will not go down any partisan roads, but lot of reasons why that unfortunately was not happening. But I think things could be changing. I really do. And there's a lot of positive vibes in directions that there could be some different talks, some different avenues. And I want to just talk about that, but in the context of what we've been talking about today, which is, China's thoughts and feelings when it comes to North Korea, the ROK-US alliance, and other topics. I think looking at really the next month and few weeks, we could see some very dynamic changes when it comes to the potential US posture towards Korea overall, whether we're talking about North Korea or South Korea. Now, why am I saying that? Well, it seems like there could be a possibility of another one of these impromptu Trump-Kim summits. There's been some positive signals in a lot of different directions. Obviously, we have President Lee in South Korea, who's doing a lot of signaling that he wants to see that sort of symmetry happen, looking for different opportunities to try and push that. Lots of different South Korean ministers and experts going on record, being hopeful for that. Even President Lee going so far as that, he'd be willing to do some sort of emergency interim deal on North Korea and de-emphasize denuclearization, maybe as like a final step towards normalization of relations, which I think is rather smart, right? The smart way to go. You see that North Korea has offered some steps. Kim Jong-un has recently stated that he would be willing to have some sort of face-to-face meeting with the United States if, I forgot his exact wording, if silly denuclearization or something to that effect was essentially dropped. And that's in line with what the North Koreans have been saying for a number of years now, since after the pandemic. So, no shockers there. Donald Trump, since being inaugurated into office, has stated on numerous different occasions that he'd like to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un, that they had a good relationship. Now, you can take many different views on if that approach by Trump 1 administration was effective, if it did anything. Look, I was very supportive of that. I'm on record of that. I think that not having the North Koreans testing ICBMs is a good thing. I think it's been great that the North Koreans have not tested a nuclear weapon since, I believe it was Labor Day of 2017. So we're going on, 7-8 years where they haven't tested a nuclear weapon. Those are things that have all slowed down the North Korean nuclear juggernaut. So those are positive steps. I think there's been a little shift, though, in the Trump administration's line of thinking that may open the door to some sort of symmetry. And again, why it's important to understand Chinese viewpoints on these issues. There's a report in Fox News that was then recirculated in Korean media that basically said that Trump would be willing to meet with Kim Jong-un or the North Koreans without any preconditions. Now, that line has been used in many different US administrations. Biden administration used that line as well. But I think it's important because it could signal that, at least in the initial meeting, that denuclearization will not be discussed. Now, I don't think the Trump administration is ready to get on board with completely dumping denuclearization, but that at least gives them a little bit of political room, if you will, to be able to have the initial meeting to see, what could be possible with North Korea. And I've been in two minds of this. I've kind of gone back and forth on this issue, whether there could be a potential summit or at least, quick meeting of Panmunjom all over again, like we had back in 2019. And I think this could be very viable. I really do. If you look at the Trump administration's sort of foreign policy challenges right now, they obviously, North Korea at the moment does not rank very highly. But if Trump was looking to build that resume of being a peacemaker, trying to get that Nobel Prize that I'm sure that he wants, I think for him, Korea could offer a number of different opportunities. I think first, obviously, the war in Ukraine is going badly. He thought he was going to solve it, quote unquote, within a day. He was probably half kidding and didn't mean that, but he thought he was going to be able to solve it very quickly. Obviously, that hasn't happened. And I think the war is probably going to continue probably for at least another 6 to 9 months, maybe longer. Obviously, the situation with Israel, with the war in Gaza, with the 12-day war with Iran, obviously, that was not something I think that Trump anticipated would get escalated back in July. Not going to be something I think that's going to offer him a lot of foreign policy success. US domestic politics is, quite frankly, a disaster, and that's putting it nicely. Democrats and Republicans can't agree on anything, and we're in a government shutdown right now. And there's a list of other things that I can sort of get into, but Donald Trump, I think, would love to have something on the foreign policy track that gives him some positive momentum, that gets him to sort of reset his footing in place on the world stage, and having a positive meeting with North Korea and maybe getting some talks back on track would be helpful. Now, I think the next question is, where does that go? What would be the discussion? Well, I think if denuclearization isn't going to be something that can be put on the table right away, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but that's a whole other issue. What would be something that the United States, China, South Korea can all get behind? Well, I think a formal ending of the Korean War and some sort of peace declaration, I think, would be a very positive first step. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in a Panmunjom meeting, in a month from now, but I think that is something that sets a roadmap to peace that I think would offer benefits to everybody. Offer its benefits to Kim Jong-un, that, he's putting himself out there politically once again after a failed Hanoi summit that went very badly for him, that he can extract some sort of concessions from the United States. It gives him a little bit of a political win. It would give Donald Trump a huge political win. I think he would be able to have that conservative media echo chamber here in the United States recirculate that over and over again on Fox News and all the different conservative outlets that are here, and be able to trump that as a win, and no pun intended. For South Korea, I think that might be able to open the door in terms of being able to have a better relationship with the North Koreans. Maybe being able to put denuclearization or reunification, on the back burner for the moment, and just try to rebuild those instruments of trust to be able to say that we're not in a state of war anymore, I think is a very powerful thing. If you'd asked me that 5 or 6 years ago, I wouldn't have probably agreed with that. But I think if you're going to try and change the relationship with North Korea, you can't be in a state of war. You can't talk about things like arms control, the potential for denuclearization, or freezing the North Korean nuclear program, or freezing the North Korean missile program, without having at least being able to say we are now in a peaceful state. I would note this would not be in a treaty because the United States Senate would have to ratify that. And I have no idea where that would go. I don't think there's been a lot of polling on that in probably a long time. But I think a simple declaration of peaceful intent by all sides, including South Korea, China, the United States, and North Korea, I think would be beneficial. After that, I think we need to talk a little bit about, just very briefly, about where the Trump administration is now, and the international environment vis-a-vis China, and this important research that you guys have been doing. I think the Trump administration looks at the world, and I think they look at it like a lot of Americans do, is the United States is a very wary superpower. We've made a lot of mistakes globally. We've engaged in a lot of regime change wars that had no benefit to the United States, that did a lot of damage to our international reputation. And I think the United States is not looking to be an isolationist power, but I think to pull back on some of these different commitments, and refocus on the domestic foundations of its power. And I think that could mean U.S. troops leaving the peninsula. Maybe not right away. And I think we do have to keep in mind that the 2019 NDAA does specify legally that the United States, that no U.S. president can just pull U.S. forces out of Korea. There would have to be extensive congressional notification. There would be hearings. So I'm not really sure that the United States would do that immediately under a Trump administration. I think if you look at the law, the United States can pull, I think, 4,000 troops out before that signals congressional oversight. So you might see something like that in the months and years ahead. So keep in mind that. Looking at Chinese perspectives at all of this, and where the research that you guys did come into play, I think it's very important to understand what China's views would be in all of this. I think they would welcome a Trump administration rapprochement with North Korea, as long as that doesn't take away any influence that they would have in Pyongyang. I don't think it would. I think the North Koreans would be sort of very receptive to some sort of working with the United States. I think the Kim regime has dusted off the old playbook from the 1960s and 1970s of trying to work the great powers against each other, and trying to get as many benefits out of all those great powers as best as it can. So I think the Kim regime would be looking at that. Circling back just one more time to the research that you guys did, when it comes to China, I think there is a lot of fear that again, the United States is trying to pull South Korea into this sort of three-way alliance between Tokyo, Seoul, and Washington, to try and impose China. And I just don't see Seoul buying into that sort of mindset. And I think the Chinese have a right to be very worried about that. Although I don't think the Trump administration is going to be very successful when it comes to that. So I guess I would just conclude by saying that I'm hopeful now that we have a lot of different players on the Korean Peninsula that have a lot of desire for peace. I think that the Trump administration, looking for that Nobel Prize, but also I think looking to lessen global commitments, and looking at sort of Western hemispheric defense being the most important thing. Having a little bit less of skin in the game when it comes to Korea would be vital. But I think they understand there's a lot of steps they'd have to take to get there. So that is going to be difficult, but we could be there. I mean, a month from now, we could all be talking about what happened in Panmunjom. And I think it's something that we all need to watch. So I don't want to go over my time. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. We can take a little bit of time to respond to the points that were made by our discussants. In the meantime, we also encourage anyone from our audience who has a question for us to also prepare it. You can use the chat function below, or you can use the raised hand function in order to signal that you want to ask a question, and we will get to those next. I want to, first of all, thanks to both of you for your feedback on this, and for recognition of the importance of the work and of the topic, even if the results were not as extensive as we had hoped for. So everyone, I suppose, can relate. Everyone who is working within a liberal democratic context can somewhat relate to the difficulties in getting feedback from Chinese sources, authentic feedback from Chinese sources. The question of why China is so opposed to increased U.S. presence or increased U.S. assets, as was raised by Professor Sohn, would have definitely been a valuable one to have asked. We can certainly speculate as to what that answer is. The presence of the troops there, if it persists, could lead to greater U.S. involvement in the event of a regime instability, for instance, and would increase the likelihood of a unified peninsula that has an alliance again with the United States. Only at that point, it's no longer an alliance designed to deter North Korea, then it's more likely to be an alliance designed to deter China, for instance. So we can certainly draw conclusions based on things that we have heard from Chinese sources, official statements, and experts. But yes, I do agree that that would have been a good thing to explore. And regarding the possibility of a peace declaration between the different sides, that does seem like an aim that they could be working together toward. All the powers involved there could be working toward that aim potentially. Right now, it seems like the biggest obstacle to even a practical step is the mindset of Kim Jong-un. Particularly now, it's been speculated now for a couple of years, probably ever since the piece by Bob Carlin and Siegfried Hecker about the change in perspectives with Kim Jong-un and his regime, that they are now prepared for a global climate where the United States is no longer the target of their negotiations, no longer the target of their diplomacy, but the framing of Mr. Carlin and Mr. Hecker's piece was that North Korea is preparing for war. That got the most attention, but I think it was much more valuable to say that we were looking at a period of time where North Korea no longer considers the United States and South Korea as its primary diplomatic counterpart.